Yo, what is up guys? Delboy here, aka Blue Collar Sports TV. Hopefully you guys are doing well. If you're new here, smash that like, hit subscribe, all of that good stuff. So I've been meaning to make this video for a couple of weeks now, basically ever since Alexander Usyk beat Anthony Joshua, and the topic at hand is rematch clauses in boxing, more specifically rematch clauses in the heavyweight division, and even more specifically rematch clauses being used to an extreme degree by Eddie Hearn and Matchroom. Obviously, as it stands right now, Tyson Fury is the WBC champion, and Alexander Usyk holds the IBF, WBA, and WBO heavyweight titles. Of course, Alexander Usyk recently defeated Anthony Joshua, quite resoundingly. It wasn't a close fight, and obviously he now needs to fight Anthony Joshua for a second time due to the rematch clause. And I've got to say, as just a regular old boxing fan, I'm starting to become a little bit frustrated by Matchroom's excessive use of rematch clauses. It's becoming tedious at this point in time, and quite frankly, it's holding up the heavyweight division as it stands right now. And you know, this isn't the first time in particular a Matchroom rematch clause has essentially held up undisputed. Now, I've been very consistent on this. When Andy Ruiz beat Anthony Joshua back in June 2019, I said the fight to make was Ruiz versus Wilder for undisputed, right? But nevertheless, they had a rematch clause. Joshua regained his titles. When Tyson Fury beat Deontay Wilder in their second fight, I said the fight to make is undisputed between Tyson Fury and Anthony Joshua. Obviously, Wilder and Fury also had a rematch clause. And now here we are, again, Anthony Joshua has a rematch clause against Alexander Usyk. And once again, I will say, the fight to make is Tyson Fury versus Alexander Usyk for all of the marbles to see who the number one guy in the division is. But there's a big difference in narrative when it comes to Matchroom and rematch clauses. When it was Wilder, when it was Fury, it was a big problem. Many people, many channels, many fans said that these guys were holding up their heavyweight division. They are avoiding undisputed, ducking undisputed, etc, etc, etc. We heard all of these narratives in regards to Fury and Wilder, and at the time I agreed because I wanted to see undisputed. I still do. But surely now the mirror needs to be held towards Anthony Joshua and Eddie Hearn. And the most egregious thing about this situation, as far as I'm concerned, is that Alexander Usyk wasn't a voluntary, he was a mandatory. He earned his shot. He was the WBO mandatory, and he was still made to sign a rematch clause. You may say, well, Delboy, Alexander Usyk didn't have to sign that rematch clause. Surely he needs to take some responsibility, and I get that. He does. However, if he didn't take that rematch clause, we all know what would have happened. Anthony Joshua would have threw his title in the bin. That's what would have happened. And if Alexander Usyk fought for a vacant title against Joe Joyce, he's not going to get the same credit as he would by beating Anthony Joshua. It's really that simple. Anthony Joshua comes with a lot of money, a lot of prestige, and a lot of credit if you win that fight. So being the type of guy Alexander Usyk is, the guy who wants to fight the best and take tough challenges, of course he was going to sign that rematch clause. He was basically hoodwinked into it. And for me, I believe all sanctioning bodies should, at this point in time, take a stand in regards to rematch clauses in boxing. I don't believe there are any circumstances where a rematch clause can be used in the event of defending against a mandatory challenger. I don't believe that's right at all. To me, if you're a mandatory, you're a mandatory. You should have one shot at the title, and that is it. And if a fight is controversial, then the sanctioning body can go from there. So for example, when George Groves fought Carl Froch, he was the IBF Mando, and the first fight was very controversial, got stopped early, so the IBF then ordered a rematch. That's the only time a rematch should be ordered when it comes to a mandatory. If a fight is controversial, it should be up to the sanctioning body to order a rematch. I know that's not always perfect because we know how these sanctioning bodies operate, but I would rather that than the current situation in boxing. the heavyweight division in the past few years has been held up by rematch clauses. And Matchroom are big culprits of this. Now, I heard people call out Tyson Fury and Deontay Wilder for doing the same thing, but I've not heard anybody call out Eddie Hearn and Matchroom for this bullshit. I mean, even Dillian Whyte against Otto Wallin has a rematch clause. Can you imagine that? The guy that Dillian Whyte himself, Eddie Hearn, Matchroom, etc. were essentially calling a bum when Tyson Fury fought him, yet here we are, they have a rematch clause for that fight. Me personally, I believe that rematch clause should be voided. The WBC have basically announced that Dillian Whyte, they're going to basically order Dillian Whyte versus Tyson Fury in 30 days, right? Now that ruling has been made, I believe there should be a clause in that which essentially voids any rematch clause. If you're a mandatory and you're in a mandatory situation and you're taking a fight in the interim, you shouldn't be saved by a rematch clause, as far as I'm concerned. If Otto Wallin wins, he should get his shot, but that is what it is, it's okay when Matchroom do it, when Eddie Hearn does it, it's good business, but, if a Tyson Fury does it, if Deontay Wilder does it, they're holding up the division. And by the way, before that third fight happened, I said the same thing. I wanted undisputed. I wanted Wilder versus Ruiz. I wanted Fury versus Joshua. I want Fury versus Usyk. But nobody else has been consistent on this. I have. So, what do you make of it? Are you getting sick of the amount of rematch clauses in the sport of boxing? I certainly am. I personally believe that a lot more needs to be done when it comes to abusive rematch clauses in boxing. Like I said, I'd be happy with a mandatory essentially not having to sign a rematch clause where it's essentially illegal for a fighter to request a rematch clause if he's fighting a Mando. It shouldn't be done. Do you know what I mean? That's how I feel. I understand when Joshua fights a guy like Andy Ruiz, it's a voluntary, it's short notice. Again, I don't particularly like it, but I understand that. But when it comes to mandatories, when it comes to a guy like Dillian Whyte, who is the WBC mandatory, I don't believe that he should then be able to put a rematch clause in his contract to essentially save his shot as a Mando in case he loses. I don't think that should be allowed. If he's number one ranked but not mandatory, fair enough. Essentially what I'm saying is, if you've got a commitment with a sanctioning body in any shape or form, you should not be able to have a rematch clause in that contract. As far as I'm concerned, I think boxing would be a lot more streamlined, divisions would be a lot less held up than they are now, and ultimately, I believe it would make the sport a lot better, a lot more streamlined. I do hope more people talk about this. It's been something that I've thought about for quite some time. I've been meaning to make the video for a little while, but I've just not got round to it. But yeah, I for one am getting a little bit tired of these rematch clauses in boxing. And for me, the best solution is anybody who has a commitment with a sanctioning body should not be able to use rematch clauses in contracts. It's okay if it's a voluntary, fair enough. I can accept that. But if you're a champion and you have a mandatory, you should not be able to use a rematch clause. And if you're a mandatory yourself and it's been confirmed in writing that you're mandatory, you should not be able to use a rematch clause in case you lose to try and then save your Mando spot. That's how I see it. And I think boxing would be much better off if those rules were enforced. I mean, just my opinion. What do you guys think, though? I see a lot of double standards when it comes to this. It's okay for some guys, but not okay for others. But, I want to hear more people talking about this. Share your thoughts below. It's been your guy Delboy. Peace.